The Jeffrey Dahmer story quickly became one of the biggest shows of 2022. We got to see what Dahmer's victims really went through from this show, but there are actually a lot of details that the show decided not to include for various reasons. In this video, we're going to look at how the show differs from what was shown on Monster. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. First up, what Netflix's Dahmer tapes documentary adds to Monster's story. While the TV show Dahmer is all about the serial killer's life and crimes, there are still a few details that the show overlooked. Conversations with a Killer, the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes on Netflix, covers all the aspects that the show missed. The Jeffrey Dahmer tapes is the third chapter of Netflix's Conversations with a Killer collection, after the John Wayne Gacy tapes in 2022 and the release of the Ted Bundy tapes in 2019. The documentary is split into three parts that describe Dahmer's upbringing, murder cases, trial, and final death in jail. Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer Story, is a show about Dahmer and his victims. The show made sure to take its time to explain the victims' circumstances before Dahmer took their lives. Because of this, the dramatized story of Jeffrey Dahmer's life skips over many of Dahmer's personal confessions and the deep dive into Dahmer's mental health during his trial. But the reason the writers chose to remove Dahmer's point of view was so people wouldn't sympathize with the serial killer. Netflix's new documentary series, Monster, which premiered on October 7, 2022, included some very shocking findings that gave us a better understanding of who Dahmer was and why he did what he did. Next, Dahmer thought he was born evil. According to the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes, Dahmer felt that after his first two killings, he was just born evil and was destined to carry out the devil's job. To test this theory out, he started obsessively watching movies showing demonic powers and reciting those creepy chantings. He became a big admirer of Star Wars: Return of the Jedi, especially Emperor Palpatine, who basically embodied evil through mind control. The imagery in the movies, though, just wasn't enough for him. He needed to act out his wicked desires. So he got yellow contact lenses that resembled Palpatine's scary eyes, and he liked to impersonate the devil, just to entertain himself before going out on the hunt for his victims. Dahmer's obsession with the devil went well past simple curiosity to actually impersonate and worship it. He eventually put all his obsessive focus all into the murder of his victims. Tracy Edwards, Dahmer's final victim, survived his meeting with Dahmer, and his testimonies helped the authorities to finally put an end to the killings. According to Edward, Dahmer chained him after inviting him back to his apartment by saying he'd pay him to pose for Dahmer's photos. Dahmer then forced Edwards to watch The Exorcist 3 with him while holding a knife to his chest. Dahmer was engrossed with the movie and didn't really pay attention to Edwards. Apparently, he started swaying back and forth in his seat and making incomprehensible noises, talking in tongues. People were pretty surprised by how self-aware Dahmer sounded in all these tapes of his confessions. He proposed multiple theories on why he'd been having the urge to kill. Moving on, Dahmer thought he could get powers. Luckily, Edwards was able to escape from Dahmer's apartment and help the police in apprehending Dahmer. When the authorities investigated his apartment, they noticed a shrine Dahmer had created with the bones of his victims on top of the Polaroids he'd taken from them. To make the shrine, a line of skulls and ashes was laid on a black table, with two full pairs of skeletons standing on the left and right sides of the table. There was also a blue globe lamp shining above the table. Dr. Carl Wallstrom said in the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes episode 3, Evil or Insane, that Dahmer felt like he was developing a power center in which he would be able to get special powers with the sacrificial shrine made from skulls and bones. Even though none of Dahmer's other victims lived to recount their story, it's easy to imagine what other ceremonial activities Dahmer could have forced them to join before burying their bodies. Jeffrey Dahmer grew up in a very religious family, and his paternal grandmother, Catherine, pushed him to go to church with her every Sunday. While it's unclear if Dahmer's grandmother was actually aware of his Catherine Dahmer was strongly against homosexuality based on her Christian views. It's possible that the religious scrutiny Dahmer faced as a child, as well as the extreme humiliation he felt for being gay, might have contributed to his obsession with the devil, but Dahmer returned to his childhood religion after his trial and started seeking spiritual counseling from a Christian preacher. He was baptized and committed himself to Christianity till his death, encouraged by his father and priest. Coming up, what really happened with the mannequin. Jeffrey Dahmer kidnapped a mannequin as a replacement for the men he wanted in Monster. He even dressed it up and slept with it in bed to act out his fantasies. The next day, when he left for work one day, his grandmother saw the mannequin on his bed and got rid of it. When Dahmer returned home and saw his bed empty,
I'm not telling you till you tell me where it is.
What do you have that for, Jeff? Jeff, I want to tell you something. I love you no matter what. Do you have
he yelled at his grandmother in rage for putting the mannequin away without his permission. In actuality, that's not what happened at all. According to Dahmer in Conversations with a Killer, the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes, his grandmother discovered the mannequin while doing Dahmer's laundry, but she didn't throw it away. Dahmer's mother Joyce had left him at that point, leaving Catherine Dahmer to care for Jeffrey on her own. She questioned Dahmer about it, asking him what it was and where he got it from. Then she called his father Lionel to tell him about the mannequin. Dahmer claims he then took the mannequin into his grandmother's basement, smashed it, and threw the parts away before his father could see them. Dahmer would later dismember and dispose of 4 of his 17 victims in the same basement. Next, Dahmer wasn't completely lonely in his childhood. In Monster, most of Dahmer's childhood is shown as lonely and neglected, with Dahmer's mother Joyce always favoring his younger brother David over him, and Jeffrey Dahmer's father Lionel constantly absent because of disagreements between him and Joyce. Young Jeffrey Dahmer was also shown to have no friends in the show, so he would spend hours alone researching animal carcasses. What the show failed to mention was that Dahmer had a childhood friend who would actually encourage his early fascination with anatomy and taxidermy. Eric Tyson, who sometimes appears in the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes, talks about his childhood with him. Tyson and Dahmer would regularly go wandering around in the woods together, looking for animal bones and carcasses, and display them together on a table in his backyard shed. But Tyson, understandably, didn't have Dahmer's passion for anatomy and taxidermy, and the two eventually fell out. Now let's move on to why everyone's suddenly obsessed with cannibals. With series like Yellow Jackets and Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer Story, and films like Fresh and Bones and all, it seems like people seem to be very interested in cannibalism. Cannibalism is probably one of the biggest taboos ever. It has a long history in the story, stretching back to ancient Greece. In William Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus, the Roman general cooks Timora's sons into a pie and forces her to eat them. Cannibalism also has a long history in movies and TV shows. With the abundance of cannibal media, it seems like viewers are specifically fascinated by this. Cannibalism is also pretty popular among audiences because of its extreme shock value. Finally, the truth behind cannibal movies and TV shows. What cannibalism symbolizes depends entirely on the TV show or film it's depicted in. As we talked about before, George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead was a comedy on capitalism that exploited the metaphor of cannibalistic zombies in a shopping mall setting. Cannibalism acts as a metaphor for how the cannibalistic characters completely ignore society's rules and the idea of taboo. In Yellow Jackets, by eating Pit Girl, the characters give up their humanity for the sake of survival. Cannibalism in Yellow Jackets is basically a statement on how quickly your humanity can be taken away in the face of survival. In Fresh, on the other hand, Steve's rich customers had become so powerful and wealthy that the only way for them to feel novelty in a world where they can virtually do anything is to break the taboo. Yikes! Fresh also looks at cannibalism as a metaphor for men objectifying women, and the higher classes dehumanizing and eating the lower classes. For example, Steve literally objectified Noah by chopping her body parts and selling them to the highest bidder. That's a wrap for today's video. Do you think Dahmer, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer Story should have included the stuff from Dahmer's tapes? Make sure to let us know in the comments down below. As always, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and click the subscribe button for more videos like this one. We'll see you next time.